The USS Horizon drifted through the darkness of space like a silent giant. It was a warship built for defense, carrying weapons that could turn small moons into dust. But today it carried something far more fragile than weapons. It carried hope for peace. Gunnery Sergeant Danny Reyes stood near the observation window and watched the alien space station grow larger as they approached. The structure was massive, built from black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Spikes and sharp angles covered every surface. It looked less like a place where people lived and more like a weapon floating in the void. "That is one ugly building," said Corporal Katie Vance as she walked up beside him. She was the squad medic, a woman in her late 20s with short brown hair and steady hands that had saved many lives. Reyes nodded slowly. The Vraxians do not believe in beauty, only strength. He had read every report about the Vraxians that existed in human databases. They were a reptilian species that stood over 7 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in thick scales that could stop small-caliber bullets. They had claws that could tear through metal and teeth designed for ripping flesh. Their eyes could see heat signatures in complete darkness. But the most dangerous thing about them was not their bodies, it was their culture. The Vraxians had built their entire civilization around one idea: the strong survive, and the weak serve. They had conquered dozens of star systems and enslaved any species they considered inferior. Humans had avoided contact with them for years. But now, with the Vraxian Empire expanding toward human space, the politicians back on Earth had decided that talking was better than fighting. So they sent diplomats to negotiate a trade agreement, and they sent Marines to make sure those diplomats came home alive. Staff Sergeant Ben Crawford walked over to join them. He was a large man with a shaved head and arms covered in old scars. He had been fighting in one war or another for 20 years, and his face showed every day of it. "Captain wants everyone in the shuttle bay in 10 minutes, he said. "The aliens have cleared us for docking." Reyes turned away from the window and gathered his squad. There were 8 of them in total. Tony Delgado was the youngest, barely 20 years old with nervous energy that made him bounce on his feet. Maria Santos was quiet and calm, the kind of soldier who never panicked no matter how bad things got. The others were good Marines, trained and ready for anything. At least that is what Reyes hoped. The shuttle ride to the station took only a few minutes. Ambassador Linda Castillo sat in the front with her team of diplomats. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had negotiated peace treaties with a dozen different species, and she believed she could do the same with the Vraxians. Reyes was not so sure. The docking bay of the station was enormous. Hundreds of Vraxian warriors stood in rows along the walls, watching as the humans stepped off their shuttle. Each alien was a mountain of muscle and scale, holding weapons that looked heavy enough to crush a man with a single swing. The air inside the station was hot and thick with a smell like burning copper. Reyes felt sweat forming on his forehead, but kept his face calm. Showing weakness here would be a mistake. A Vraxian, even larger than the others, stepped forward. He wore armor made from the bones of creatures Reyes did not recognize. A long cape of dark fur hung from his shoulders. His eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils, and they studied the humans the way a cat studies a mouse. "I am Supreme Hunter Thrakvos," the alien said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I rule this sector of the Empire. You are the humans who wish to trade with us." Ambassador Castillo stepped forward with a practiced smile. "We are honored to meet you, Supreme Hunter. The people of Earth hope this meeting will be the beginning of a long friendship between our species." Thrakvos made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Friendship. The Vraxians do not have friends. We have prey, and we have those strong enough to stand beside us. Which are you?" The negotiations began in a large chamber filled with alien advisors and guards. Castillo talked about trade routes and resource sharing. She spoke of mutual benefits and peaceful cooperation. The Vraxians listened, but their eyes showed no interest. Hours passed. Reyes stood against the wall with his squad, watching every movement in the room. He noticed that the Vraxian warriors kept looking at the humans and whispering to each other. Some of them were laughing quietly. "They think we are a joke," Reyes realized. "They think we are weak little creatures playing at being important." Finally, Thrakvos raised one massive clawed hand, and the room fell silent. "I have heard enough," he said. "Your words are soft, human. Your offers are boring. The Vraxian Empire trades with species that have proven their worth through strength. Your kind has proven nothing." Castillo kept her composure. "Perhaps we could arrange a demonstration of human capabilities. Our technology," Thrakvos interrupted with disgust. "Any species can build machines. What matters is what a species is without their tools. And humans, from what I can see, are nothing. Small, weak, no claws, no fangs, no armor. You are the most pathetic creatures I have ever seen." The Vraxian warriors laughed openly now. Some of them made gestures that Reyes assumed were insults. Thrakvos stood from his throne and walked toward the human delegation. Each step made the floor shake slightly. He stopped directly in front of Ambassador Castillo and looked down at her like she was an insect. "Tell me, little human," he said. "Have any of you ever even fought a real predator?" The room went quiet. The diplomats looked at each other with fear in their eyes. None of them spoke. Reyes felt something shift inside him. He thought about his grandfather who had fought in 3 wars. He thought about his father who had died defending a colony from pirates. He thought about every Marine who had ever given their life so that others could live in peace. And he stepped forward. "You ever battled a Marine?" The words came out calm and steady. Every eye in the room turned to look at the human sergeant who had just spoken to the Supreme Hunter like an equal. Thrakvos turned slowly. His yellow eyes narrowed as he studied this small creature that dared to challenge him. "What did you say?" Reyes met the alien's gaze without flinching. "You asked if we have fought real predators. I am asking if you have ever fought a real warrior. Because if you want to see what humans are capable of, I am happy to show you." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Thrakvos smiled, showing rows of teeth like daggers. "Interesting," he said. "Very interesting indeed. I accept your challenge, little human. We shall see what you are made of." Ambassador Castillo grabbed Reyes by the arm. "Sergeant, what are you doing? This is not part of the mission." Reyes looked at her with calm eyes. "With respect, Ambassador, this is exactly what the mission needs. They will never respect us until we prove we deserve respect. And there is only one way to prove that to a Vraxian." He turned back to face Thrakvos. "Name the place and time. I will be there." The warlord's smile grew wider. "The arena of Korath. 1 hour. Try not to die too quickly, human. I want to enjoy this." The arena of Korath was older than human civilization. It had stood for 10,000 years. Built from stone so dark it looked like solid shadow. Millions of Vraxians had fought and died on its bloody sand. Champions from 100 conquered worlds had been dragged here to face the Empire's greatest warriors. None of them had ever walked out alive. Danny Reyes stood in a small room beneath the arena floor and listened to the crowd above him. The sound was like thunder that never stopped. Thousands of Vraxians were stomping their feet and roaring with excitement. They had come to watch a human die. Corporal Katie Vance was checking his vital signs with a medical scanner. Her face was tight with worry. "Your heart rate is elevated," she said. "Blood pressure is high. Danny, you do not have to do this." "Yes, I do," he replied quietly. Staff Sergeant Ben Crawford stood by the door with his arms crossed. "The ambassador is furious. She says you have ruined months of diplomatic preparation." "Maybe," Reyes said. "Or maybe I just saved us from wasting more months talking to people who will never see us as equals. The Vraxians only understand one thing: strength. If I win this fight, they will have to respect us. If I lose..." He paused. "Well, they were never going to respect us anyway." Maria Santos walked over and handed him his combat knife. It was a simple blade, 7 inches long with a black handle worn smooth from years of use. It had belonged to his father and his grandfather before that. "You come back alive," she said. "That is an order." Reyes smiled slightly. "Since when do corporals give orders to sergeants?" "Since sergeants started doing stupid things like fighting 7-foot-tall lizards." A Vraxian guard appeared at the door, and spoke in broken human language. "Time now. Human comes to arena." Reyes took a deep breath and walked toward the door. His squad followed behind him until they reached the edge of the arena floor. From there, they would have to watch from the stands with the rest of the aliens. Tony Delgado grabbed his arm. The young private's face was pale. "Sergeant, I read about Vraxian combat rituals. They fight to the death. Always. There is no surrender." "I know. How are you so calm?" Reyes looked at the young Marine and remembered being that young himself. Back when war was still an idea instead of a reality. "I am not calm. Tony. I am terrified. But being scared does not mean you get to stop doing your job. Remember that." He stepped out onto the arena floor, and the crowd exploded with noise. The sound hit him like a physical force. Tens of thousands of Vraxians filled the stone seats that rose up in circles around the fighting pit. They were screaming and howling, waving weapons in the air, and beating their tails against the ground. In the center of the arena, Supreme Hunter Thrakvos was already waiting. The Warlord had removed his bone armor and ceremonial weapons. He stood bare, except for a simple cloth around his waist, showing off his natural advantages. His scales were dark green and thick as tank armor. His claws were 6 inches long and sharp enough to cut stone. His muscles moved like cables beneath his skin as he stretched and prepared for combat. A Vraxian announcer spoke to the crowd in their harsh language. Reyes did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. They were mocking him, calling him prey, laughing at the idea that this tiny creature thought it could stand against their supreme hunter. Thrakvos looked at Reyes and shook his head slowly. "I almost feel bad for you, human. Almost. But you challenged me in front of my people. You made me look weak by even acknowledging you. For that, I will make your death slow." Big talk from someone who has never fought a Marine. The Warlord's eyes narrowed. "You keep using that word. Marine. What does it mean?" Reyes held up his knife and let the arena lights reflect off its blade. "You are about to find out." A horn sounded, and the crowd fell silent. This was the moment of beginning. Ancient Vraxian tradition demanded complete silence until first blood was drawn. Thrakvos charged. He moved faster than something that big should be able to move. One moment, he was standing 20 feet away. The next moment he was right in front of Reyes, his massive arm swinging in an arc that would have taken the human's head clean off his shoulders. Reyes was not there. He had started moving the instant the horn sounded, dropping low and rolling to the left. The Warlord's claws cut through empty air where his neck had been a half-second before. Reyes came out of the roll already striking, his knife slashing across the back of Thrakvos's knee where the scales were thinner. Dark purple blood sprayed across the sand. First blood to the human. The crowd made a sound like all the air had been sucked out of the arena. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They simply stared at the impossible sight before them. The Supreme Hunter, undefeated in 300 cycles of combat, was bleeding. Thrakvos looked down at his leg with an expression of pure disbelief. Then he looked at the human who was already moving again, circling to stay out of reach. "Lucky strike," the Warlord growled. "It will not happen again." He attacked with a combination of strikes that would have killed most creatures 10 times over. His claws carved patterns in the air, each swing powerful enough to tear through metal plating. His tail swept low, trying to knock the human off his feet. His jaws snapped at any part of Reyes that came close to his head. But Reyes was never where the attacks landed. He moved constantly, never stopping, never staying in one place long enough to be hit. When he saw an opening, he struck. A cut across the wrist, a stab into the armpit where the scales were soft, a slash across the face that nearly took out an eye. Each wound was small. None of them were fatal. But they were adding up. In the stands, Tony Delgado watched with his mouth hanging open. How is he doing that? How is he still alive? How? Ben Crawford's eyes never left the fight. Training. 20 years of training. Every day, for hours, learning how to fight things bigger and stronger than him. Learning where the weak points are. Learning how to move so the enemy cannot predict where you will be. Maria Santos nodded slowly. He is not trying to beat the alien in a straight fight. He knows he cannot do that. He is bleeding him out. Death by 1,000 cuts. Down in the arena, Thrakvos was starting to understand the same thing. His attacks were growing slower as blood loss began to affect him. His breathing was heavy and ragged, wounds covered his body. None of them serious alone, but together, they were draining his strength. "What are you?" he demanded between attacks. "No prey fights like this. No prey survives this long." Reyes ducked under a wild swing and put another cut across the alien's ribs. "That is because I am not prey." He danced back out of reach and raised his bloody knife. "I am the predator here." The crowd had gone completely silent now. They were watching something they had never seen before. Something impossible. A human was winning, and the supreme hunter of the Vraxian Empire was afraid. The fight had been going on for 15 minutes. In Vraxian combat, most battles ended in seconds, a quick exchange of strikes, a killing blow, and one warrior standing over the body of another. That was how it had always been for as long as anyone could remember. This was something different. Danny Reyes circled the wounded warlord with patient steps. His body was tired and his lungs burned with each breath, but he did not let it show. Showing weakness would be death. So he kept his face calm and his movements steady, even though every muscle screamed for rest. Thrakvos was in worse shape. The Supreme Hunter had dozens of cuts across his body now. Purple blood dripped from wounds on his arms, legs, chest, and face. One of his eyes was swollen, half shut from a slash that had come within an inch of blinding him completely. His breathing came in harsh gasps, and his movements had lost their earlier speed. But he was still dangerous. A wounded predator was often the most deadly kind. "Why will you not die?" Thrakvos demanded. His voice was rough with pain and frustration. "I have killed creatures twice your size. 3 times your size. I have hunted beasts that could swallow you whole. You should be dead 10 times over by now." Reyes did not waste breath on an answer. He watched the alien's body language, reading the tiny signs that told him where the next attack would come from. A shift in weight. A tensing of muscle. The direction of the eyes. Thrakvos lunged forward with his remaining good arm. His claws tore through the air toward the human's chest. Reyes sidestepped and grabbed the arm as it passed. In one smooth motion, he twisted his body and used the alien's own momentum against him. There was a horrible crunching sound as the elbow joint bent in a direction it was never meant to go. Thrakvos screamed. It was a sound of pure agony that echoed through the silent arena. He fell to his knees, his broken arm hanging useless at his side. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tens of thousands of Vraxians in the stands stared at the impossible scene before them. Their supreme hunter, the greatest warrior their empire had ever produced, was on his knees before a human. Reyes stepped back and lowered his knife slightly. His body was shaking with exhaustion now, and he could not hide it anymore. Blood from a dozen small wounds soaked through his uniform. One of his ribs was cracked, maybe 2, but he was still standing. "Yield," he said. His voice was steady despite everything. "This fight is over." Thrakvos looked up at him with yellow eyes full of pain and something else, something that might have been wonder. "The fight ends only in death," he said. "That is our way. That has always been our way. Then change your way. You are beaten. There is no shame in admitting that." The warlord laughed bitterly. "You do not understand Vraxian culture. Human, if I yield, I am nothing. I lose everything. My rank, my honor, my place in history. Death is better than such shame." Reyes shook his head slowly. "That is the difference between your people and mine. We do not see survival as shame. We see it as victory. The battle you lose today is the lesson you learn for the battle tomorrow. Dead warriors do not learn anything." Thrakvos was silent for a long moment. Blood continued to drip from his wounds onto the dark sand of the arena floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "What are you, human? I have studied your species. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no special senses. On paper, you are one of the weakest intelligent species in the galaxy. Yet here you stand, having done what no other creature has ever done. How? Reyes limped forward a few steps and crouched down so he was at eye level with the kneeling alien. Around them, the crowd remained completely silent, straining to hear every word. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It is not our bodies. You are right about that. We are soft and slow and weak compared to most species. But that weakness is exactly what makes us strong. Thrakvos tilted his head in confusion. That makes no sense. Think about it, Reyes continued. Your people evolved as apex predators. You were born with claws and scales and strength. You never had to struggle to survive because nature gave you everything you needed. But humans? We had nothing. We were born onto a world that wanted to kill us every single day. He stood up slowly, using the moment to catch his breath. Our planet is what your scientists would call a death world. The water is poison to most species. The air carries diseases that can kill in hours. The animals evolved to be as deadly as possible because anything less meant extinction. And we had to survive all of that with nothing but our brains and our will to live. The words hung in the hot air of the arena. Vraxians throughout the crowd were leaning forward, listening to this strange creature explain the impossible thing they had just witnessed. We learned to make tools because we had no claws, Reyes said. We learned to work together. Because alone we were weak. We learned to never give up. Because giving up meant death. And most importantly, we learned to fight, not because we were good at it naturally, but because we had no other choice. He held up his knife, still stained with purple blood. This weapon is simple, primitive by your standards, but it is the result of 10,000 years of humans figuring out better ways to kill things. We have been perfecting the art of war since before your empire existed. Every generation learned from the one before. Every battle taught us something new. Thrakvos stared at the human with new understanding in his eyes. You are saying that your weakness forced you to become strong. I am saying that we never had the luxury of being weak. Every single human alive today is descended from survivors. People who refuse to die, no matter what the universe threw at them. That stubbornness is in our blood. It is who we are. The Warlord was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice held something it had never held before when addressing another species. Respect. I see now why no empire has ever successfully conquered human space. It is not your ships or your weapons. It is you. Your people would rather die fighting than live as servants. That is correct, Reyes said, and we are very, very good at fighting. Thrakvos closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something had changed in his expression. The arrogance was gone. The contempt was gone. In their place was the look of a warrior who had finally met an equal. I yield. The words were quiet, but they carried across the silent arena. Every Vraxian heard them. Every Vraxian understood what they meant. The supreme hunter, undefeated champion of the Empire, had submitted to a human. Reyes reached down and offered his hand to help the alien up. After a moment of hesitation, Thrakvos took it. The gesture was not lost on the crowd. It was not the action of a conqueror standing over the conquered. It was one warrior showing respect to another. The arena erupted into chaos. Some Vraxians were roaring with outrage. Others were stomping their feet in what might have been applause. Arguments broke out in the stands as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Reyes helped Thrakvos walk toward the exit. Neither of them looked at the crowd. They had learned everything they needed to learn about each other on the blood-soaked sand. The universe had just changed, and humanity had announced its arrival. The medical bay of Vraxian Station Korath was not designed for human patients. The beds were too large, the air was too hot, and the medical equipment looked more like torture devices than healing tools. But it was where Corporal Katie Vance found herself working through the night, patching up her sergeant while surrounded by curious alien doctors. Danny Reyes sat on the edge of an oversized examination table, wincing as Vance wrapped bandages around his cracked ribs. His body was a map of cuts and bruises. Every movement sent pain shooting through his muscles. But he was alive, which was more than anyone had expected. 3 cracked ribs, Vance said as she worked. Dislocated shoulder that I already put back in place. Deep laceration on your left arm that needed 20 stitches. Multiple minor cuts. Severe bruising across your entire torso. Mild concussion. She paused and looked at him with tired eyes. You should be in a hospital, not sitting up and talking. I have had worse, Reyes said. That is not the comfort you think it is. The door to the medical bay opened, and Staff Sergeant Ben Crawford walked in. His face was unreadable, but his eyes showed relief when he saw Reyes conscious and talking. Ambassador Castillo wants to see you, Crawford said. She is either going to thank you or kill you. I cannot tell which. Give me 5 minutes. Vance finished wrapping his ribs and helped him put on a fresh uniform. Moving was difficult, but Reyes forced himself to walk without limping, showing weakness now. After everything he had done to prove human strength, would undo all of it. Ambassador Castillo was waiting in the diplomatic quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation. She was standing by the window, looking out at the stars, and she did not turn around when Reyes entered. Do you have any idea what you have done? She asked quietly. Yes, ma'am. I won. You won. She finally turned to face him. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of anger and something else. You challenged the most powerful military leader in the Vraxian Empire to personal combat. You could have died. You could have started a war. You could have destroyed everything we have worked for. With respect, Ambassador, we were not going to get what we wanted through talking. The Vraxians do not respect words. They respect strength. Now they have seen our strength. Castillo was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, her expression softened. You are right. The Vraxian High Council has already sent a message. They want to reopen negotiations. This time, they are calling us partners instead of petitioners. Reyes nodded. It was what he had hoped for. But that is not why I called you here. Castillo continued. Supreme Hunter Thrakvos has requested a private meeting with you. Just you. No guards, no diplomats, no weapons. When? Now. He is waiting in his personal chambers. Reyes did not hesitate. I will go. Crawford stepped forward. Sergeant, you can barely walk. If this is a trap, it is not a trap, Reyes said. I know warriors. Thrakvos wants to understand what happened today. He needs to understand. For a creature like him, being beaten is worse than being killed. The only way he can live with it is if he learns why it happened. 20 minutes later, Reyes stood outside the door to Thrakvos's private chambers. 2 massive Vraxian guards stood on either side, but they made no move to stop him. Instead, they bowed their heads slightly as he approached. The gesture surprised him. The door opened, and Reyes stepped inside. The chamber was large and filled with trophies. Skulls of strange creatures hung on the walls. Weapons from 100 different worlds were displayed in cases. Banners marked with alien symbols hung from the ceiling. It was the room of a conqueror, filled with reminders of victories past. Thrakvos sat in a massive chair near the center of the room. His wounds had been treated and bandaged, though he still looked weak. His broken arm was held in a sling made from some kind of metal frame. When he saw Reyes enter, he gestured to a smaller chair across from him. Sit, human. We have much to discuss. Reyes sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 warriors who had nothing left to prove to each other. I have been thinking about what you said in the arena, Thrakvos finally said. About your species. About how your weakness made you strong. I did not believe it at first. I thought it was just words, meant to confuse me, but I cannot stop thinking about it. What part? All of it. My people have always believed that strength comes from what you are born with. Strong scales, sharp claws, powerful muscles. These are the gifts of nature. We thought species without these gifts were simply inferior, meant to be conquered or enslaved. Thrakvos looked down at his bandaged arm. But you have shown me something different. Your strength does not come from your body. It comes from something else. Something inside. Reyes leaned forward slightly. Every human is taught from childhood that we can overcome anything if we refuse to give up. Our history is full of stories about people who faced impossible situations and survived through sheer determination. We call it the human spirit. The will to keep fighting even when all hope seems lost. We have no such concept, Thrakvos admitted. When a Vraxian faces a superior opponent, the only honorable options are victory or death. Survival through endurance is considered. He paused, searching for the right word. Cheating. Cheating. That explains why you were so frustrated during our fight. You kept expecting me to either beat you quickly or die quickly. The idea that I would just keep going, keep bleeding you out slowly, never occurred to you. No, it did not. The Warlord shifted in his chair, his yellow eyes studying the human across from him. Tell me more about your home world. You called it a death world. What does that mean? Reyes thought about Earth. He thought about the blue oceans and green forests that most humans took for granted. Then he thought about all the ways those beautiful places could kill you. Our planet has extreme temperatures, he began. Parts of it are frozen, solid, year-round. Other parts are so hot that exposed skin will burn in minutes. We have storms that can flatten cities and waves that can swallow ships. The ground shakes and opens up. Mountains explode and cover everything in burning rock. Thrakvos listened with growing disbelief. Our animals are survivors too. We have predators in our oceans that have been eating everything in their path for 400 million years. We have insects that kill more humans each year than all our wars combined. Even our plants can be deadly. Some of them produce poisons that can stop a heart in seconds. And your species evolved to survive all of this? More than survive. We conquered it. We learned to build shelters that protect us from the weather. We learned to grow food instead of hunting for it. We tamed animals and made them work for us. We developed medicine to fight the diseases. And when we ran out of challenges on our own planet, we built ships and went looking for new ones in space. The Warlord was silent for a long time, processing everything he had heard. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, almost humble. My people have made a terrible mistake. We saw your physical weakness and assumed you were inferior. We did not see that your weakness was actually your greatest weapon. It forced you to become something that evolution alone could never create. What is that? Adaptable. Thrakvos leaned back in his chair. The Vraxians are strong, but we are also limited. We fight the same way we have always fought, because it has always worked. We have never needed to change. But humans change constantly. You face a problem, and you find a solution. Then you face a new problem, and you find a new solution. You never stop learning, never stop improving. He looked at Reyes with something like fear in his eyes. If we ever truly went to war with your species, we would lose. Not because you are stronger than us, but because you would find ways to beat us that we could never predict. And you would never, ever, stop trying. Reyes met the alien's gaze steadily. Then let us make sure that war never happens. Thrakvos nodded slowly. Yes, I think that would be wise. In that moment, sitting in the trophy room of an alien warlord, Danny Reyes realized that he had accomplished something far more important than winning a fight. He had planted a seed of doubt in the mind of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Vraxian Empire would think twice before challenging humanity now. And that was a victory worth bleeding for. Word spread through the Vraxian Empire like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the fight, every station and colony in their vast territory had heard the news. Supreme Hunter Thrakvos, undefeated champion of 300 cycles, had fallen to a human. A single human with nothing but a knife and stubborn determination. The reactions were mixed. Some Vraxians refused to believe it. They called it a trick, a lie, propaganda spread by enemies of the Empire. Others demanded revenge, calling for a full military assault on human space to restore their wounded pride. But many, especially the younger generation and those who had actually watched the fight, began asking questions that had never been asked before. What if they had been wrong about humans? What if they had been wrong about strength itself? In the diplomatic quarters of Station Korath, Ambassador Linda Castillo was fielding more communication requests than she could handle. Representatives from a dozen Vraxian factions wanted to speak with her. Trade offers that had seemed impossible yesterday were now being discussed openly. The balance of power in the negotiations had shifted completely. "I have to admit," she said to Danny Reyes during a brief break between meetings, "when you stepped forward in that chamber, I thought you had lost your mind. I thought you were going to get yourself killed and start a war in the process." Reyes sat in a chair by the window, his body still aching from his wounds. "It was a calculated risk. Calculated." Castillo shook her head with a tired smile. "You challenged a 7-foot-tall alien warlord to single combat with nothing but a knife. That is not calculated. That is insane. Sometimes insane is the only option that works." She could not argue with that. The results spoke for themselves. 3 days after the fight, something unprecedented happened. Supreme Hunter Thrakvos requested a formal audience with the human delegation, not as an enemy or a superior, but as an equal. The request sent shockwaves through both human and Vraxian ranks. The meeting took place in the same chamber where the original negotiations had failed so completely. But the atmosphere was entirely different now. The Vraxian warriors who lined the walls no longer looked at the humans with contempt. Some of them even bowed their heads slightly as the delegation entered. Thrakvos stood at the center of the chamber. His wounds were healing but still visible, a permanent reminder of what had happened in the arena. When he saw Reyes enter with the rest of the delegation, the warlord walked forward and did something that made every Vraxian in the room gasp. He placed his uninjured hand over his chest and bowed his head to the human sergeant. It was the Vraxian gesture of respect between equals. It had never, in the entire history of the Empire, been given to a member of another species. "Gunnery Sergeant Danny Reyes," Thrakvos said formally, "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You taught me something that changed my understanding of the universe. For that, I am grateful." Reyes returned the gesture as best he could, placing his own hand over his chest. "You showed courage in admitting defeat. That is not easy for anyone." "No, it is not." The warlord turned to address the entire delegation. "I have spoken with the High Council of the Vraxian Empire. I have told them what I learned in the arena and in my private conversations with your sergeant. They have agreed to a proposal that would have been unthinkable 1 week ago." He paused, letting the tension build. "We propose a military exchange program between the Vraxian Empire and the human species. Our warriors would train alongside your Marines. We would share techniques, strategies, and knowledge. We would learn from each other and grow stronger together." Ambassador Castillo stepped forward carefully. "That is a generous offer, Supreme Hunter. But may I ask what the Empire expects in return?" "Only this: that when the time comes, humans and Vraxians stand together against common enemies. The galaxy is vast and full of dangers that neither of our species has faced yet. Alone, we are strong. Together, we would be unstoppable." It was more than anyone had hoped for. The trade agreement they had come to negotiate now seemed small compared to what was being offered. This was not just commerce. This was alliance. This was the beginning of something that could reshape the entire galaxy. Later that evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters to celebrate. Someone had found a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden in the supplies for emergencies. This seemed like as good an emergency as any. Tony Delgado, the young private who had watched the fight from the stands with terror in his heart, found himself sitting next to Sergeant Reyes. The older Marine was nursing his drink slowly, his eyes distant with thought. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "During the fight, were you ever scared? I mean, really scared? That you were going to die?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was honest in a way that surprised the young Marine. "Every second. From the moment I stepped into that arena, until the moment he yielded, I was certain I was going to die. I have never been more afraid of anything in my entire life." Delgado frowned. "But you did not show it. You looked completely calm the whole time." "How?" "Because fear is not weakness, Tony. Fear is information. It tells you that something dangerous is happening and you need to pay attention. The trick is not to ignore fear, or pretend it does not exist. The trick is to use it. Let it sharpen your senses. Let it fuel your focus. And then do what needs to be done anyway. He took a sip of his whiskey and looked at the young private with serious eyes. Any Marine who tells you they are never afraid is either lying or stupid. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing your job despite being terrified. Remember that, and you will survive a lot longer than the people who try to pretend they are not scared. Delgado nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. It was the kind of wisdom that could not be taught in training. It could only be learned through experience, passed down from one generation of warriors to the next. The next morning, the USS Horizon prepared to depart from Station Korath. The ship would carry news of the Alliance back to Earth, where politicians and military leaders would debate its implications for months. But for the Marines who had witnessed what happened in the arena, the implications were already clear. Humanity had proven itself. Not through technology or numbers or political maneuvering. Through the simple, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Corporal Katie Vance finished her final check of Reyes's wounds before departure. He was healing well, though the scars would be permanent. She suspected he did not mind. "You know," she said, as she packed away her medical equipment, "what you did was probably the bravest thing I have ever seen. Or the stupidest. I still cannot decide which." "Maybe both," Reyes said with a slight smile. "Definitely both." Staff Sergeant Ben Crawford appeared at the door. "Sergeant, you have a visitor. Says he wants to say goodbye before we leave." Reyes walked to the docking bay where Thrakvos was waiting. The Warlord had come alone, without guards or advisors. He stood looking out at the horizon through the massive windows of the station. "A fine ship," Thrakvos said without turning around. "Strong and fast. Built for war but hoping for peace. Like its crew." Reyes joined him at the window. "We prefer peace. But we are ready for war when it comes. I believe that now." The Warlord finally turned to face him. "I have lived for many cycles, human. I have conquered worlds and defeated champions. I thought I knew everything there was to know about strength and power. Then you showed me how wrong I was." He reached into his belt and pulled out something small. It was a scale, dark green and thick, still stained with dried purple blood. His own blood, from one of the wounds Reyes had inflicted. In Vraxian culture, warriors exchange tokens after a battle that changes them. "This scale was torn from my body by your blade. I want you to have it, to remember what we learned from each other." Reyes took the scale carefully. It was heavier than it looked. Smooth on one side and rough on the other. He would keep it for the rest of his life. "Thank you," he said simply. Thrakvos nodded. "Until we meet again." Gunnery Sergeant Danny Reyes, Marine of Earth, warrior of humanity, and the only creature in the galaxy who has ever made me bleed. The Horizon departed an hour later, jumping to hyperspace on a course back to human space. As the stars stretched into lines around the ship, Reyes stood alone at an observation window and looked out at the infinite darkness. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the pain, the moment of victory. And he thought about what it all meant. Humanity was no longer alone. They had allies now. Real allies. Forged in blood and mutual respect. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. And somewhere out there, around stars that humans had not yet visited, other species were hearing the story of what happened in the arena of Korath. They were learning the lesson that Thrakvos had learned the hard way. Never underestimate a human, especially not a Marine. Danny Reyes smiled slightly and turned away from the window. He had a squad to check on and paperwork to file. The work of a Marine was never done. Even after changing the course of galactic history, that was fine with him. It was just another day on the job.